Story 1. My husband had complimented me on my soft skin. I said it was my lotion and suggested he use some. He started rubbing it on his body and told me, I now have the softest rooster east of the Mississippi. Story 2. We have an insult in my mother tongue which basically equates to son of a bitch, but for the father, and I once heard my uncle call his own son that when he was misbehaving as a kid. Not sure if he realized. In case anyone is wondering, the phrase was sagbab. Let's see who knows what language that is. I love how this comment has sparked a multicultural insult fest. Story 3. I tend to work at 100 miles per hour. I've done the same job for over 10 years, so I can do it with my eyes closed. I did a job for a coworker whose department was short-staffed. When I told her I was done, she said, "Wow, that was quick." And I said, "Yes, I'm known for it." She burst out laughing, and it took me a few seconds to get why. Story 4. Just this morning, my boss walked into my office while I was rearranging my desk. There was a mess and stacks of paper everywhere. He said, "Wow, you're working hard." Without thinking, I replied, "I'm not working nearly as much as it looks." He raised an eyebrow, just went, "Huh," and walked away. It was about 30 minutes later that I realized I had just told my boss I like to appear busy without actually getting anything accomplished. Story 5. After meeting a girl at a bar, our conversation reached the topic of desk jobs versus labor jobs. When asked what my preference was between the two, I replied, "Well, I've had a lot of brain jobs in the past, but I think I prefer hand jobs now." The look on her face said it all, and from that point on, I was referred to by her friends as the hand job guy. Story 6. Not really an insult, but I was watching a Steelers game, and they had just drafted a cornerback named William Gay. He made a great play early in his rookie year, and I turned to my buddy and said, "I really like that Gay guy." Story 7. Oh, do I have the best self-damaging story? I'm a Spanish-speaking person. I live in Argentina. I studied to become an engineer. The university provided opportunities to meet and mingle with girls on campus. I started talking to a girl once. She was very short and cute. She told me her name, but she didn't have a nickname. One time, I asked her about options for me to come up with nicknames for her. In Spanish, I basically shot myself in the foot in the worst way by saying, "Te gusta chiquita?" I essentially asked if she enjoyed small penises. The phrase in English would sound something like, "How do you feel about thumb-sized dicks?" Her face reflected what was promptly understood by me, but the damage was done. Story 8. In a meeting about my performance and how I feel about my job, yearly personal development plan, and performance review. Boss, how do you feel about what you do? Me, I love it. I feel mentally challenged. Boss, what? Me, what? Boss, moving on. I still think about it, and that was 5 years ago. Story 9. Once I went to a pharmacy to buy condoms, and they only had packs of 12 condoms, but I was only looking for 3. Unfortunately, I was very tired, so I asked the pharmacist if she had smaller ones, and just as I said it, I realized the mistake I made. She just said, "No, these are the only size we have." I was too embarrassed to say that I actually wanted fewer condoms, so I just thanked her and left the place. Info. English isn't my first language, and mixing this with being tired resulted in having this awkward moment. Story 10. Currently working at a front desk hotel job while attending school. We'll always have to check identification of people who want to charge something to their room after being checked in. A gentleman was trying to charge something to his room, and I asked to see his identification to verify he was the occupant of that room. He was struggling to pull it from the plastic holder of his wallet. Made the mistake of saying, "You can just take it out and show it to me, sir, if that's easier for you." Awkward silence consumed the rest of the interaction. Story 11. I posted on the relationship advice forum and said I needed to do a minor penis surgery. I don't have a small penis. I meant a small, mild, simple penis surgery. Try to beat that. Story 12. At my university, the sexual health clinic was giving out free condoms, and when I was offered some, I said, "I've not needed these for nearly 3 years. I don't see that changing." Story 13. Not an insult, but accidentally super gay. My wife was complaining about getting a mammogram, and I laughed at her. She said, "Yeah, well, you're going to have to get your prostate checked." So no, being a medical professional, I excitedly said, "I can do my own prostate exam. If I have to stick a finger in my butt and say it feels great, I will." She gave me this look and started laughing. "You're going to stick your finger up your own butt and say it feels great?" And me, still oblivious, said, "Yes, I'll stick a finger in my own butt and say it feels amazing." Story 14. In sociology class during my senior year of high school, back in 2004, the teacher was explaining how men make more than women. Some number, I forget, like $75,000 a year more. My memory is a little foggy. Trying to be funny, I said, "So, a penis is essentially worth 75,000?" The teacher begrudgingly said, "Yes, I guess so." To which I exclaimed, "I'm sitting on a gold mine." The class went silent for a second until my good friend yelled, "Why are you sitting on your penis?" I regret trying to be funny. It still makes me cringe thinking about it. Story 15. Wait, what? That is amazing. The only thing I can recollect is something that happened a couple of years ago when I was quite drunk at a party. My friends went outside to sneak a cigarette, so naturally, I went with them as I am not really a social butterfly. Some girls approached us, so we started talking. It's important to note I had recently bought a new phone. Anyways, one of the girls started talking to me, and as a conversation opener, she asked me about my phone. I told her what phone it was, and as drunk as I was, I told her, "It's also rather big. You might say I am trying to compensate for something." I don't think I have to mention I did not get lucky that night. Story 16. 15 years old and my family is on a cross-country road trip from California to North Carolina. We stay at a campground in Gettysburg, which just happens to be on the 4th of July, so the place is packed. It's a big place with lots of stuff to do. So my brother and I wander off to find kids to hang out with and manage to run into a few people from various other states. About an hour in, and of course a lot of talk is about us being from California. It comes up that we don't have lockers in our school because of concerns about hiding guns in them. One of the other guys, 16 or 17, says, "I always carry my gun, big old gun," or something like that. He smirks, so I ask if I can see it, not getting what he thought was an obvious joke. I ask if I can see his gun, and he goes, "Get on your knees and I'll show you." Everyone else laughs. Then I get on my knees and say, "Can I see it now?" He just shakes his head and walks off. My 13-year-old brother later was like, "Dude, he was talking about his dick." Story 17. I was in the pub and someone noticed my large feet. They said large feet, large, then pointed to their groin area. I assured them that wasn't true. They got a massive laugh. I felt really good. A laugh is a laugh. Story 18. At an event, my friend Zach, whose real name is Richard, was asked by a guy why he didn't go by Dick if he didn't like the name Richard. He just replied that he preferred the name Zach. "Oh, but I love Dick." Fuck. Story 19. Not an insult, but very embarrassing. This is probably the worst I have ever put my foot in my mouth. I went to a female doctor in my early 20s who was quite attractive. I decided to go back to college a little later in life, so I was going for a physical for college. I was very nervous but knew it would be handled professionally. The doctor entered with another attractive member of staff, whom she instructed would stand behind me during the examination just so there is no, she said, and to keep us both safe. The assistant said nothing and walked behind me as the doctor started the exam. We were making idle conversation as she was going through, and just as she got to my nether region and took my boys into her hands, she mentioned that I was the last patient of the day. Without thinking, I blurted out, "Well, you know what they always say, the last patient of the day is always the hardest." The woman behind me let out a loud laugh and started howling with laughter. The doctor started laughing while remaining at eye level with my crotch. I immediately began protesting that it was not what I meant, but the damage was done. Both of them were in tears laughing, and I was mortified. We eventually laughed it off and kept going, but I was never allowed to live it down for years after when I kept going to that same doctor. Story 20. I grew up helping out on my grandparents' small farm. One day when I was moving hay up to the hayloft, my grandfather, who recently had his hip replaced so he couldn't help, was watching me work and said, "J. Fred 94, you're as strong as an ox." To which I replied, "And twice as smart." At the time, I didn't understand why he laughed so hard. Story 21. I had my hand in my pocket and fumbled around and found a lollipop. I said, "There's something in my pocket." The girl said, "Oh, what is it?" I replied, "A lollipop." She gave a flirty look and smiled. "Is it big?" She might have winked as well. I said, "No, it's only small." It was like a small 5-pence lollipop that one of my nieces probably shoved in my pocket. I got a look of disappointment. Story 22. In Spanish, we have an insult that roughly translates to wrongly raised, which is an insult directed at a misbehaving young person about how their parents raised them incorrectly. That's why they're considered stuck-up or arrogant, etc. The thing is, I've heard a lot of parents, including mine, call their kids this very insult, malcriado. I don't think they realize. Story 23. I was on vacation at a beach playing a card game with my friends. We were up in the room, and I thought I'd be cool and wear my sunglasses that had a reflective coating. So, everyone could see my cards in the reflection of my sunglasses. What a mistake. Story 24. One of the very few times I approached a woman at a bar, I ended up getting her number. As I handed her my phone, which was an iPhone 5C, she kind of chuckled and said, "I have a small phone." I tried to reply slyly by wanting to say, "Well, that's the only thing that is small about me." Instead, I said, "Well, that's not the only thing small about me." Story 25. One time we were in anatomy class and we were going over the muscles. My confident self stands up and I'm like, "You guys could use me as your muscular model," and pointed to the guns, ha ha ha. Well, then another student proceeds to shout out, "No, we're good. We'll use you for the skeletal system." Not necessarily insulting myself, but I did start the roast. Story 26. My first lunch out with coworkers and I was in the back seat of one of their cars. Meaning to tell my coworker in the front passenger seat he could scoot his chair back for more space. I said, "I've got 4 inches back here for you." And he responds, "What an offer." Story 27. Not myself, but someone else. When I was in college, over the summers the first worked at a go-kart track. A lot of camps would come, and if the kids were not tall enough to drive the go-karts themselves, usually a camp counselor would drive them. One day we had this really big camp with only 4 or so counselors who needed to drive every kid. When the races were over and we were switching kids out, we would talk and joke around with them a little. After one race, one of the girl counselors jokingly asked me, "How can I get my cart to go faster?" In my mind, I was thinking that if she just ditched the kid, the cart would not be weighed down as much and she would go faster. So I said, "Lose some weight." I do not think she heard me, but my friend did, and he was laughing at me the entire shift. Story 28. Told a Tinder match I was average size. I meant to say average height. Both are true. She responded with, "I literally just laughed out loud in the middle of class." Story 29. I worked in Japan for half a year around the time the South Park episode, Chin Pokemon, came out. I was also one of 2 Americans at this office. The other American and I sat near each other and were talking about South Park when I decided to talk about this particular episode, regularly saying Chin Pokemon. After noticing some stares and a few chuckles from some of my Japanese coworkers, I decided to search Chin Pokemon. Turns out I was basically saying tiny penis monster repeatedly in the office. I guarantee some people were thinking I was talking about myself. Story 30. Hope it's all right for a woman to chime in. Someone saw me taking down posters from bulletin boards at work. He commented that he doesn't often see people taking those off. I foolishly said, "Yes, I'm pretty good at taking things off." It took me 5 seconds after his "have a nice day then" to realize what I had just said. Story 31. So, my son was maybe 13. My daughter, wife, and I were having dinner, and my son decides to let us know he has a new nickname that he just came up with, and it's cool like a rapper's. Since his first name starts with a D, he decided he wanted to be D-Bag. We all just looked at each other and fell over laughing. It was funnier in that he just didn't get it. Story 32. My mom got super upset with me when I was a kid. Rightfully so. I was being difficult and screamed, "Oh, you son of a bitch." I started laughing. She realized what she said and started laughing too. Story 33. When I was little, my dad said I was hard-headed, and my response was to ram my head into his stomach saying, "I am." And he said, "No, because you don't listen." Felt stupid. Story 34. Not a true insult, but the only one I remember right now. It's not a legitimate insult. It kind of got me, and my friends, being friends, gave me a hard time for it. I was drinking with some friends, and one started pouring shots and asked if I wanted one. I replied, "No thanks, I don't do anything straight anymore." My best friend looked at me and was like, "Haha, nice of you to come out of the closet." Note, I'm not gay and was referring to alcohol, though apparently many people have thought or do think I am gay. Good times and laughs were had by all, and then we continued to drink. Story 35. Not me personally. I was often the butt of jokes in my friend group. One of the guys in my friend group was still a virgin. We were about 20 at the time, and we'll call him Todd. A couple of guys were messing with me, and I asked why they never pick on Todd. He responded with, "'Cause I'm unlovable." He quickly realized what he said and tried to correct himself by saying he was untouchable. But it was too late. We were already laughing our heads off.